Have you ever watched your law enforcement officer respond to something that seemed so small? Maybe a sound, a smell, a siren, and thought, why are they reacting to that? The truth is, those memories aren't in the past for their brain. They are stored in the wrong place, locked in survival mode. EMDR is a therapy that helps the brain move those memories so that they can finally process them and not relive them. In today's episode, we're talking about the power of EMDR and why it's life-changing for so many first responders and their families. Today's episode is one that I have been wanting to record for a super long time because EMDR really changed the story and Mike's and I journey. And if you're a spouse today that is feeling maybe scared or confused or unsure how to help your law enforcement officer, well, I really feel this episode might be for you. Today, I am honored to welcome Alana Trevina to Code 44 podcast. She is a licensed independent social worker with nearly decades of experience in the mental health field, and she specializes in supporting first responders and their families. But what makes Alana's perspective especially meaningful for us today is that she's also a wife of a former police officer. So she understands both personally and professionally the unique pressures that we all face in this life. She's completed extensive training that focuses really on first responders' wellness. And what I'm most excited about today is that she's certified in EMDR. Thank you so much, Alana, for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this. I listen to podcasts all the time. I've listened to you a few times and I'm excited.
You are my first guest on my podcast, so I'm excited that this topic is EMDR. So we're going to jump on in. So tell me how your personal journey started with Frontline Wellness.
Frontline Wellness, we opened our doors in June of 2024. It's really been an amazing journey. Since then, I've gotten to do some trainings with different departments. I've gotten to help a bunch of people through the individual therapy services. A lot of EMDR for sure. Finding my husband, Juan Trevino, he was a Toledo police officer, graduated their academy 2017, 2018. It was his dream. His father and mother-in-law. He's got family history there. And shortly after he started on the streets, he had his first critical incident. And it was one of those moments where I remember he came home and he did the first responder manly. I'm fine. Everything's fine. I could see he was a little bit perhaps shaken up or stunned from all of it, but he did his job of reassuring me, the worried wife, that he was just fine. He went to one therapy session post that event, which I was very proud of him for. He came home and informed me that clinician had told him that he was handling it really well and that he didn't need to come back and that he was all right. And so he and I carried on with our lives and we didn't really talk about it too much after that. Fast forward a handful of years after that, and the Toledo Police Department experiences the line of duty deaths of Officer Dia and Officer Stalker. Of course, this took a huge toll on the department. I saw my strong husband really kind of crumble under the weight of that. And after that, he and I started seeing some trouble in our marriage and in our relationship. He became agitated, more frustrated. I became a little bit more anxious. One of the things that I've worked through a lot in my own work is personalizing things. So he was kind of numbed out oftentimes or just kind of trying to survive what he had experienced. And I would personalize a lot of that. Eventually, he was able to get into a clinician who was much more trauma informed. especially first responder informed, and they began their therapy work together. Come to find out, this initial critical incident that he experienced really rocked him more than either of us gave it credit for. And so he did a lot of beautiful work in EMDR, and we began to see the need in our community for culturally competent clinical care, for clinicians who not only knew trauma, but knew first responders and knew that first responders, they do not play sick, they play well. I've
Love
never
that.
yeah, I've never had a first responder come in and play their symptoms up. I will tell you, they downplay it to the max. And that's really what was happening in the beginning there with JP. He said, oh, it's no big deal. And he did his job of wanting to protect me from how much it really impacted him. On to start a Frontline Wellness, and we've been just trying to spread the word and break stigma ever since then.
Wow. The words you just use, no law enforcement officer comes in and plays sick. They
Hmm.
play well.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
Wow. I never thought about it like that, but how true that statement is. And really, that defines what the stigma is, right? They're pretending to
Absolutely.
be well. You talked a little bit about some of the first symptoms that you were seeing. The typical "I'm fine," I think is
Hmm.
probably what everybody listening to this podcast gets on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about some of the other first symptoms that you're experiencing, but we have a lot of individuals on the podcast today that maybe just aren't quite sure of what those signs are. So can you maybe dive a little bit deeper of what you personally saw that might resonate with somebody else?
Yeah. To be honest, in the moment, I don't think I noticed a ton. It's a little bit more looking back. I'm aware of some things I missed. And I've had to work through a little bit of my own, perhaps shame and guilt about that. I was really just starting out in my career, just learning about trauma and EMDR, and a little bit in my own little world until, like I said, 20 and 2021, when it really hit the fan. Looking back, I can see prior to that, JP became much more agitated, annoyed, irritated. It's really this classic thing that happens where anger becomes the cover for anxiety. We see that a lot in men, especially. Anger is kind of the more accepted emotion as opposed to sadness or fear. And so anger kind of comes up and covers that. And so I saw a lot of agitation. Looking back, I can also see a level of perhaps numbing out, video games, social media, those types of things. I can also see a felt distance between he and I, where, he was there and, we go to dinner and we're doing the things, we're going through the motions, but he's not there, right? It's this classic, like, the lights are on, but your personality is not home. Now I know that as a little bit of dissociation.
Absolutely. I always just say you can tell in a first responder the look, the dark eyes, they're there, they're present, they're having a conversation, but you can see that a little bit more is going on behind their eyes. And I think
Absolutely.
that's what you were
Absolutely.
just describing, and I think we can all resonate with that. You talked a little bit about this, but I want to have you dive a little bit deeper into how did what you were seeing at home lead you specifically into exploring EMDR?
Well, I actually learned about EMDR prior to this. And this is where, again, looking back, there's a part of me that says, man, as a professional and as someone who knows EMDR, I could do a lot of the why didn't I see this? Why didn't I do that? But JP really had to go on his own journey with this. Completed my training in EMDR in between 2019 and 2020. Went on to get my certification after that. And if you can kind of line up the timelines, that's just about the time that he's experiencing that critical incident. He goes to therapy, he gets the word that he's fine, and then we kind of go on with our lives until this next incident hits in about 2020. And you got to know too, of course, between his critical incident and then those line of duty deaths, there's a whole bunch of micro events, if you will, or things that didn't quite make the department's definition of a critical incident. It's all sorts of things in maybe his personal life and also on the streets that just stack up and stack up and stack up. So yeah, at the moment, I really didn't connect EMDR with him because he got the green light from this clinician and no negativity on her. I'm sure this man went in and presented as he does. My husband is strong and he's funny and he's charming. And I think any average clinician might have said, it's fine. So in addition to the competence of knowing many officers feign being well, it's also on the officer to really be ready, willing, and able to acknowledge what's going on behind the mask.
Absolutely. So, was there a moment then that you realized EMDR and the treatment with first responders is different and it works?
Yeah, I think a lot of that came about. I mean, some of it came about with him doing his own work and seeing the differences there. A lot of it came too, though, just as I very naturally started to integrate my therapeutic knowledge with first responders as we opened Frontline Wellness. I didn't explicitly say first responders need EMDR. We kind of together said first responders need some form of culturally competent therapy. And naturally, I began to use EMDR with my clients and seeing how they have a clutter of big critical incidences and also many, many micro incidences, just having a tool that actually clears that trauma up. First responders don't really want to lay on the couch for a year and talk about their emotions. Maybe some of them do, and that's fine. But in general, they want something that is efficient and really effective. And it really is a beautiful thing to have a tool where I can say, hey, this can be a short-term treatment. One session can help. A handful of sessions can clear a target sequence really, really well.
That's powerful. And a lot of things that you just said, I resemble them in my own life. And the stories that I've heard spouses say is my spouse, my husband, doesn't want to go to therapy. They don't want to lay on the couch. They don't want all of that dug
Yeah.
out. And I do think that EMDR is a different way of thinking about things. I've been shocked over the years. I first learned about EMDR after 9/11. I heard about all of the first responders being treated with it and had explored a little bit, but it really hadn't caught on at that time. It feels like it's continuing to build power and strength, and people know about it. But in the same manner, I'm shocked when I talk to people and say, have you thought about EMDR? And they're like, what is that? I
Mm-hmm.
think today I really want to talk to them and explain what exactly is this. There's a lot of explanation. And so I want to
Uh-huh.
start out
Uh-huh.
with a little bit more of the scientific, because we're going to have listeners out there that are like, okay, tell me really how this
Uh-huh.
works.
Uh-huh.
So let's start with the scientific. Like, what does this do and why does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, my first responders often to get buy-in, the explanation I give is this more neurological perspective. One of the first things to understand is what is called the adaptive information processing model. We call it the AIP model. What that basically is the idea that your brain wants to take helpful or adaptive information and learned experiences and hold on to it and glean it over your entire brain so that you can utilize it in your life. However, trauma overwhelms this system. So basically, your brain is trying to heal and experience life as it is, but a big traumatic event can get stuck essentially in the brain. Traumatic memories very quickly get fragmented by our brain. They get kind of split up often into the sights, the sounds, the narrative experience itself, the body sensations, the emotions. For my first responders, oftentimes it's the smells. And what happens is these memories get stuck. And when that happens, the amygdala, which is our kind of fight or flight part of our brain, the part that's always scanning to say, am I safe or am I in danger? That part of the brain becomes hyperactive. And now the brain's only goal is to keep us safe. Our brain's only goal at this point is to protect. And I purposely kind of put my hands in front of my face there because the idea is our brain wants to protect instead of connect. In the presence of trauma, we can't connect with others because we're only trying to protect. So the amygdala becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, which is our rational thinking brain, becomes much less effective. It becomes inhibited. We then begin to experience triggers. Triggers can be not only the narrative thing that happened, not only, hey, it was this very specific house that the incident took place in, and I drove past that house and I'm triggered. Triggers can even be just emotional flashbacks. They can be that smell, like I said, that the different ways the memory breaks up. And so what EMDR does is it uses bilateral stimulation. Sometimes I call that back and forthness. We activate left brain, right brain, back and forth over and over to do a couple of things. It taxes working memory. It mimics REM sleep to move the memory into proper long-term storage so that instead of the memory being right here and there it is again, it's where it belongs. It also increases communication between left and right brain, whereas I feel it and now I understand it. So there's a lot of really good overlapping mechanisms of the bilateral stimulation. So basically in EMDR, we activate the memory safely and we utilize bilateral stimulation to decrease how distressing that is. And then what we do is we explore what maladaptive beliefs we have created about ourselves because of that memory. And we work to allow those to shift. It's beautiful because we're using the brain's natural healing mechanisms here. Your brain wants to heal. And in EMDR, we're just creating the atmosphere for that healing to happen.
All of that is done through eye movements, basically, right? Like you're literally moving the eyes back and forth to try to get that thought, that memory to process and move from one section to a next. Is that correct?
It is. Eye movements is one way to do it. And as per the title, eye movement desensitization, you can see that's how it started. There's this classic story, Francine Shapiro. She takes a walk in the woods and she's struggling with some things and she's looking at the trees over here and the trees over here and she's moving her eyes and she notices the distress decreases. That's kind of how the idea for this came about. These days, though, we use eye movements. We also use uppers, I call them buzzies. They're these things that you hold in your hands and they just vibrate back and forth, and that creates bilateral stimulation. I also have headphones. You put the headphones on and it makes a beeping sound. It's very customizable in each ear. We can do it online through some self-tapping. There's all kinds of mechanisms these days, and therapists are able to get somewhat creative with it to induce that bilateral stimulation.
So maybe to kind of recap this for the non-scientific ones, what would you say that EMDR is?
Yeah, a much quicker, easier, less in the weeds explanation, right, is I think of my brain as a filing cabinet. And when trauma happened, someone came in and dumped that filing cabinet, and now it's all over the place. I've got all these open files. I've got a lot of confusing stuff over here. With EMDR, keep in mind, we're not deleting any of these files, but we're gathering them, organizing them, putting them where they belong. We're mixing the unhelpful, unpleasant material with the adaptive, helpful information. Another way to think of it is if we see the brain, there's a theory out there of the brain as a prediction machine. My brain predicts that thing that happened to me is going to keep happening. In EMDR, we're giving the brain a different experience to go off of. We're having a moment of activating trauma and not panicking. And the brain learns so much from that. Like, wow, I can face this and survive it. And that's healing.
What a great visual that is. So I was thinking about how you described the filing cabinet being tipped over and all these, papers everywhere. And then I was thinking about how officers might come in and go, yeah, I'm fine. And I think about, like when my house is really messy and I'm just like, yeah, I'm fine. It's all fine. It's all good,
No big
right?
deal.
But it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on.
Yes.
Translate that into their world. There's so much trauma they have seen, and those papers laying on the floor, each one is an incident. And I liked something you said earlier, which is so true, of we think of critical incidents, ones that get exposures, one that are really big, one that the office identifies as, hey, you need to go see someone because this was critical.
Yeah.
But they see critical things almost daily, sometimes multiple daily, because just because a tragic accident isn't classified as trauma, the horrific things that they see when they're on site, or maybe they knew that individual or the families, Or I know Mike always talks about having to go and deliver that news and then that horrific sound that a loved one makes when you have to give them that notification. Those are all the papers that are laying out in the description that you just gave.
Absolutely.
Thinking about how EMDR works, like it's just so powerful.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
know some people, including my husband when he first heard of it, said, this is some really weird stuff. And I've heard a lot of people ask, like, is that voodoo crap that you're talking about? So let's talk about that. Some people might think of it as freaky, but what do you say to that?
I mean, first of all, I think that's funny and I laugh and I'll go along with it. And to them, I would probably gear them towards the neuroscience. Um, I think anything unfamiliar, it's typically coded as strange or scary, or we just kind of make fun of it. And that's okay. So I would ask someone to give it a chance. Might as well always try something once. If freaky voodoo stuff is what can heal you, allow it to. Modern medicine was once freaky.
Absolutely. Mike and I's journey, as I alluded to at the beginning, I remember we were at a conference and someone came up to us and said, our EMDR specialist has an opening. Do you want to participate? And I remember Mike looking at me going, isn't that voodoo crap? And I said, let's give it a try
See what
because
happens.
yeah, at that time he was experiencing some symptoms, some triggers. And I was in the mindset of let's try anything and everything to make
Sure.
this stop and go away. And so, once you hear the science behind it, as you describe, it makes sense. And as I communicated, I first learned about this after the 9/11 events and all the first responders that went through it and how they had to give themselves forgiveness for what had
Mhm.
happened. And that's so true in our law enforcement officers' day every single day. So, law enforcement officers are skeptical of everything. And so I'm sure them
As they
coming
should be.
in, as they should be, absolutely. What do you say to that skeptical law enforcement officer or the spouse? Sometimes the spouse
Yeah.
is even like, I don't know about that. What do you say to them before they try it?
I think what I would say is just reiterating, give it a chance. I would say that this is rooted in science. I would say the experiences speak for themselves. I would even say do your own research. Informed research. There's a lot of good information out there. As you heard me give a few different explanations about why and how EMDR works. And the truth is, what I've come to find is it's kind of all of those explanations. It works because of this is happening at the same time as this. And so I would say you are worth taking a chance on. Your family is worth taking a chance on. And if so far all you've done is either not talk about the trauma or engage in some therapies that unfortunately have us over talking about the trauma. And then we're either not healing or re-traumatizing. And so let's try this. The wonderful thing I'll say on that vein about EMDR is folks can give as much or as little information about the incident as possible. This is particularly important for folks if they have more kind of Secret Service or military type assignments that they don't feel comfortable disclosing. That's just fine. I don't need all the information about the event. I don't need the details of what happened. We have ways of doing this without the first responder having to do a lot of talking, which is what makes it kind of more effective yet gentle, if you will, on the nervous system.
I had a first responder spouse reach out to me and say, I don't know about counseling because I don't want him or her, my law enforcement spouse, to
Hmm.
have to dig up all of that trauma. He doesn't want to have to relive all of that.
Yeah.
And traditional counseling is that, right? You're reliving, you're talking about it. And that's very important in some cases and in a lot of cases. But what you just said is if that is not a route you want to go today, right now, maybe EMDR is something to consider because you don't have to go back to maybe that specific event. And what I learned is that there might not be a specific event. It might just be the combination of all of them. And that's what it was for my husband, Mike. It was just years of exposure of all of that trauma that he had seen. And so I think that's really important that if you don't want the traditional counseling, this is another option and maybe give it a try.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes it is this one critical incident that I experienced a week ago or 5 years ago. Sometimes it is just this one. I'll tell you, typically, even in those cases, we find EMDR links us to other important things that need healing. But oftentimes, too, it is cumulative trauma. One thing that you and I had previously spoke about is first responders having high ACE scores. And the ACE score is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Essentially, what I'm saying is first responders have some complex trauma oftentimes from growing up. Let's be real, this isn't a career that the average person just goes into. You could have a much easier job.
You're right.
But oftentimes first responders are those who maybe they grew up as the family hero. Maybe they grew up having to take care of those who were supposed to take care of them. I've seen it time and time again where a first responder comes in and says, this incident is the one I want to work on. And we do our work there and we clear it up. And EMDR has its ways of really shining a light to where we actually need healing. And a first responder, they have the option. I don't want that to freak people out. We can just stay in the present, and that's wonderful and amazing, beautiful work. But they also have an option then to say, I want this deeper healing. I'm aware that I've always put a lot of pressure on myself. I'm aware I've always been a perfectionist. I'm aware of whatever these long-standing patterns are. Another common theme in first responders is that their worth becomes their utility. I am worthy because I'm useful. I am worthy because I help all of these people. And we can do a lot of really beautiful work through EMDR on healing that. So you can see, right, where it can be just this one incident, or we can follow the path of the brain to lead us right to where we need healing.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So we know that the stigma is big in law enforcement. And we know that they are trained to be the calm in the storm. And what I'm really hoping my podcast as a whole is that it just brings awareness that there's potentially suffering and dealing with things that maybe we're not aware of. So, can you maybe share what a typical situation looks like when a first responder or maybe a first responder spouse reaches out to you? And really what I want people to understand is we tend to reach out for help when there's a crisis, when there's problems in our marriage, when there's problems that are being exposed. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And we can do a lot of preventiveness of it ever becoming traumatic. But what is the typical situation that you are seeing when a first responder does reach out?
Absolutely. I love what you just said, that we can do this as preventive work. I want people to hear that. I have some clients who are established with me from a critical incident that they went through, and now they come back and check in if there is anything else that comes up that overloads the system. And talk about preventative. Before this codes in my brain as trauma, before this hardens as PTS, I'm able to do the work to make sure my brain is processing it well. So if you get yourself connected with an EMDR therapist, they'll likely be able to do something like that for you too. Work through the present stuff, and then kind of like you call your doctor when you're feeling a bit under the weather, hopefully before you have a
Right.
full-blown disease. You're
Right.
doing these check-ins and you're saying, what is the ways that I can prevent this incident from kind of being coded as trauma? Yeah, but in terms of what brings someone in the door, or what is that typical first experience like? I mean, it really, really varies. The community just experienced a critical incident, and some of them will come my way, and we'll just kind of start slow by integrating resources and stabilizing them in the moment. Or sometimes it is the spouse. In those instances, I've had quite a few times, yeah, where folks will come in and my wife or my husband told me that it was this or or I'm done with.
Yeah.
And it's kind of
The
this last
ultimatum.
chance. Yeah, the last chance ultimatum. And I'll take anything that gets someone in the door. That's just fine. Eventually, we need some buy-in. In order to do the real, genuine work, someone has to be real and genuinely invested. But maybe not right when they step foot into the door. That's fine. Come in as you are, and we'll find our way through it. Oftentimes it is, though, like you said, the thing that happened, but what brings them into therapy is all the ways they tried to cover it. I had this incident and then I started drinking. I had this incident and then I started gambling. Or I became really irritated and now, yeah, we're having problems in our relationship. Typically, they come in with the symptom, and the symptom is covering the thing that happened to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple of things that I want to point out that you've said throughout this time is as a spouse or a family member, some of the things that you might be possibly seeing is that irritability. You've said that multiple times, that withdrawal or that numbness, sleeping issues. I don't know if we've talked about that one specifically, but I've heard a lot of first responders don't sleep really well. Is that an indication that maybe they're struggling?
Absolutely. It's an indication that they're struggling, and it's a landslide to more struggle. Unfortunately, there, within the first responder community, there even becomes this, I don't know, a badge of honor. Like, I only slept 3 hours last night and I've had 3 Red Bull. So we're good. And everyone's like, wow, it's this like a token of being impressed by that. And we especially see, of course, naturally struggles with those who are working an overnight shift or firefighters who are working those 24/48s. Um, the typical sleep hygiene protocols don't always work for them. So yeah, lack of sleep or even trying to lay down for sleep and you find yourself, we'll often say tired but wired. I'm
Yeah,
exhausted and I'm laying here and I'm trying to fall asleep, but the brain is just going and it won't give me
yeah,
a break. That's a
yeah,
huge sign.
absolutely. And then I also heard you briefly mention, that emotional numbness where we as spouses sometimes feel like it's us or something that we did. Or, I've heard mothers of first responders say, he just doesn't communicate, right? And those are all signs and signals that we really should be paying attention to. Now, maybe that person is an introvert and there's other things going on, but I think in the law enforcement community, where sometimes we like to build ourselves in a bubble, and as a spouse or family member, sometimes we want to believe that they are fine. And then they come home and they say, I'm fine. Or in your case, the counselor said, you're fine, go back to work, right? We still have to be aware and we have to be conscious that there might be more going on behind it. And then the
Absolutely.
last one that, I wanted to mention because it happened to us. Mike was getting triggers. We didn't know what the triggers meant. And because we didn't know, we just kind of ignored it. And that sounds really silly when I say it on a podcast, but I'm really sure that there's other people out there. For him,
Hindsight is 2020.
gosh, it so is. And now, I try not to beat myself up and go, why didn't I say something more? But for him, it was hearing sirens when he was off duty. And it just seems so odd to me because I'm like, you hear sirens and you run hot all the time. So why is that triggering you? And so we dismissed it. But wow, that was a clear indication that there was something more going on in his brain that
Absolutely.
he was not processing. Or I'm going to use your visual. His paperwork was all over the floor in a mess and
Uh-huh.
we had to get it
Uh-huh.
into the folders. So
Yeah,
those are all things that I want
absolutely.
to make sure that everyone hears today is be aware of those. Don't dismiss them.
Yeah, absolutely. The triggers can feel like that, they're just a slice of the memory. And oftentimes a trigger can come up and we don't really know in the moment exactly what it's coming from. It's not always like in the movies where a flashback is this perfect image of the exact thing that happened.
Yeah.
I've had that situation with folks, and then we're like, okay, we need to start there. But man, sometimes, like I said, the memory splits and it's just a sound, it's just a smell, it's just a sight. It's whatever our system coded as you need to hang on to this, you need to remember this.
So I'm going to ask a hard question here. As spouses, sometimes we try to force things. I think you gave the example of
Hmm.
ultimatum, right? My question is, have you ever seen it work where someone forces it to happen? Um, and maybe what is a better way that we as a support system can encourage our loved one to think about EMDR specifically, counseling as a whole, but correlating with this episode, how can we get them information that they would, be comfortable with considering? What are your suggestions there?
Yeah, yeah. You said, have I ever seen it work or someone forces it? Not that I can pull up or recall. Most of the time, if it does work, the spouse was a little bit open and ready. If you're forcing someone who is highly resistant, typically you're going to get more resistance, right? They're going to dig their heels in even more. JP and I actually did experience this where I actually said to him, like, hey, either you need to go to therapy or we need to go to therapy. And he was big and strong about his nope, I am not the problem. I don't see a problem. I'm not doing all of that. He has later come around, and the way this man has gone from that to being the biggest proponent of therapy, specifically EMDR. He'll talk to anyone who he sees about therapy and EMDR. It really is beautiful. But yeah, someone's got to have a little bit of buy-in and they have to be ready. And to the spouse, I would say, please keep in mind, EMDR is not just for the first responder themselves. EMDR is for you as well. Therapy in general is. I would say do your own work. So I would say that plus find community, find your own supports, find folks to talk to. You're not the first person to be going through this.
Yeah.
And I would also say give them time because especially with men, right? It's got to be their own idea. It
Sure
has to
does.
marinate.
Yeah.
With JP, it was not too long after I suggested it and had kind of given up on the fact that he would do his own real therapy work as opposed to just the one visit that he texted me that he had made himself an appointment
Mm.
because
Mm.
he wasn't going to do it when I was all up on him about it. He wasn't going to do it when he felt like I was forcing it. I think that's
Yeah.
just human nature anyways.
Yeah.
So I would say if you've given the message, you've given the information respectfully to your spouse, you've expressed your concerns, perhaps you've even expressed how what they're experiencing impacts your family.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes I see folks who are saying, I'm going to do this work for my kids. I'm going to do this work for my family. Eventually we get to the place where they know they're worth it as well. But sometimes it has to start with a why that is
Yeah.
different than themselves.
Yeah.
So pass on the information, express the concerns, and then do your own work and find support, find community, build yourself up and watch them maybe see that example and see what
Yeah.
happens.
I love what you said about JP because I see the same situation in Mike where maybe at first the counseling or the EMDR was something that they were a little not sure about. But after it started working, after they started getting the healing, Mike will broadcast it from any place that he
Yes.
can that
Mhm.
it works and you need to look at it. And I think that's so important that fellow responders communicate to other law enforcement officers of their healing that has taken place. Hopefully, it's like a good recipe that everyone hears about it and then they make it, right?
When you find something that works, you want to share it. And so I guess,
Absolutely.
you talked earlier about people who were skeptical. I would say have a conversation with folks who have been through EMDR or even therapy in general. Most of the time, if they were with a clinician who kind of knew their stuff, then they will say I've had some folks say, wow, it goes from voodoo to magic. And I'll tell you, it's
Yeah.
not magic. It's neuroscience and it does take time and it is not instant.
Yeah.
But folks will talk about it that way because of the stark differences in the before versus the after treatment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I defined our own experience as magic because when you get that healing, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, what a relief that is. So we talked about finding someone who does EMDR. You are licensed in the state of Ohio. I will post in the podcast description a link of how to find you and your contact information. But if someone is listening outside of Ohio, how can they find a therapist that truly specializes in EMDR and for first responders?
The first place I would send people to find EMDR certified clinicians is the EMDRIA website. That's EMDRIA, the International Association. They've got a listserv of those who are certified. People have different opinions on if you ought to be certified or not, but I will say you need to find someone who has experience. And very specifically in this case, experience with first responders. If you ask them, hey, how many first responders have you worked with? How long have you been working with first responders? Have you taken additional certifications or sorts in that realm? That would be very helpful as well. You can also check out Psychology Today is really kind of the classic way to find a clinician that treats. You can narrow it down by topic of what you're looking for help for, and first responders is one of those. But again, if you're looking for someone certified in EMDR, the EMDRIA website would be the first place to go.
Great. And I'll link that also in the description of the podcast so that you can grab it there as well. So you've shared how hard this journey, really was for you and your law enforcement officer. What would you say to the spouse listening right now that feels maybe a little bit scared, isolated, and just feeling like things are really, really bad? What would you say to them?
And I think I would say hold on to hope. I would say it does get better. I would say focus on your healing, focus on what helps you feel safe and supported. And man, if I could look back at myself, I would say you're not going to believe how much better it gets. I feel that as I say that, JP and I there was a moment when our marriage was not going to work. And I never thought I would find myself there. And we have made it through so much now that we've both been able to say to each other, I don't think there's a thing that can sink us, a thing that can rock us. I would never want to go through everything we went through again, but I will also tell you it has created a new depth in our relationship. I thought I could talk to him about anything before, and I thought he was talking to me about everything. No, but now we can. We can now, and it's beautiful. And we're teaching our son how to have healthy emotions, and we are arguing and having conflict in really healthy ways. We're dreaming together. I would say it gets better. Hold the course. Find your own support. Find your own hope.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard Mike say to people, just give it one more day, right? And every
Sure.
day, if you can say, just give it one more day, just work on it a little bit harder, just reach out. And, you talked a little bit about your support system. One of my podcasts, we talk about building your village.
Mm,
And I don't think I could make it through without our village of people that are here to support us when
absolutely.
things get a little bit crazy. So,
Yeah.
man, some great information today, Alana. Thank you so very much. I just want to reinforce that what we need to do is really recognize as spouses and families what is it that we are seeing in our loved ones and respond to it. Don't live in that bubble. Respond, do something, take action. And you talked a lot about different ways that you can do that through the counseling or the EMDR. And just that constant support. This is a tough career, a tough occupation in so many different ways, not just the mental health, but in so many other ways. I really firmly believe if we can normalize some of this communication that needs to take place in our community, once you normalize it, people start talking about it. And so that's my hope and my desire. And that's my encouragement to everyone listening today. Let's normalize it. Let's talk about it. So if this episode gave you language to do so, we hope so. If you can reach out and find someone who specializes in EMDR, please give it a try. If you're in Ohio, reach out to Alana and just start the process of at least reviewing it and giving it an option. And most importantly, talk to somebody else that is a spouse or a family member of a law enforcement, because we are a community that has been told to stay quiet. But I'm giving you permission, don't stay quiet, because we're only going to normalize it if we get louder and louder. So I hope you'll join this journey with me, Alana, and continue to get louder. I'm so thankful for everything that you shared today. Are there any final thoughts that you have?
You're not alone. Get the help. EMDR is for your spouse, but it is also for you. What we go through as spouses is a lot. I did my own work on his critical incident and what all of that was like from my point of view. Don't have shame in it. In fact, like you said, be loud and proud about it. Lead the way
Yes.
for healthy mental health in your family.
Yes. Thank you. I've got goosebumps. Thank you for joining today's episode of Code 44. I hope you learned a little bit about EMDR from the expert Alana Trevino. And if it spoke to you today, please share it with somebody that you feel would benefit from learning more about the science behind EMDR and how it works to process things through the brain. I hope you join us on future episodes of Code 44 podcast, as we're going to be talking about more resources that are available for law enforcement and their spouses. If you haven't already, click subscribe. Have a blessed day.